Page 5. The Great Famine, by Hourly History, 2019. A History from Beginning to End. Chapter 1. Background. Why should Ireland be treated as a geographical fragment of England? Ireland is not a geographical fragment, but a nation. Charles Stewart Parnell. The island of Ireland lies across the Irish Sea from mainland Britain. The distance is less than 50 miles, but the history of the two islands is troubled and very different. Although Ireland has its own distinct culture and language, its proximity to England has meant that it was an unwilling part of the British Empire for much of its history. The first formal connection between Ireland and England occurred in 1172 when Pope Alexander III declared that King Henry II of England was the feudal lord of Ireland, giving the English king the right to hold estates in Ireland and to impose English laws on the country. There followed several hundred years of strife between the Gaelic indigenous people and incomers from England. In 1542, Henry VIII was the first English king to also be formally inaugurated as the King of Ireland, but there were continuing revolts against English rule which culminated in a series of bloody confrontations in Ireland during the English Civil War. This was followed by a revolution in 1688 which ended when the deposed King James VII was finally defeated by Prince William of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. The British government continued to see Ireland as a potential source of rebellion and the Irish people as dangerous radicals. In 1695 and 1704, partly as punishment for their support of King James VII, a series of draconian penal laws were passed which targeted the Catholic majority in Ireland. Catholics were forbidden to vote or to join the British Army, and their opportunities for education were severely limited. Anyone who did not take communion in the established Church of England was barred from holding any form of public office or employment. For most of the 18th century, Catholics in Ireland remained discriminated against in favor of Protestant incomers from England who became the most significant landowners in Ireland. Then, in 1775, the culmination of the American Revolutionary War gave hope to those Irish people who dreamt of independence. American revolutionaries had waged a successful war against the British Empire and had established their own country on a democratic and non-sectarian basis. In the late 1700s, the revolution in France swept away the monarchy and replaced it with a new form of democratic government. These dramatic developments gave hope to the Irish, and in 1798 a rebellion against British rule erupted. The rebellion was led by the United Irishmen, a Republican revolutionary group led by disaffected Presbyterians and supported mainly by the Catholic population of the country. Against them stood the British Army supported by Protestants from the north. The war which followed was brutal, bloody, and confused. At one point the French Revolutionary Army attempted to land in the south of Ireland to support the Republicans but was defeated by the British Army and Navy. No one is quite sure how many people died during this rebellion, though some estimates suggest that there may have been up to 50,000 casualties, many being prisoners and civilians massacred by both sides. The rebellion formally ended in 1798 with the defeat of the Republicans, but in several Irish counties there was a form of undeclared guerrilla warfare between remnants of the Republican Army and Loyalists until as late as 1803. Determined to prevent any further insurrection in Ireland, the British and Irish parliaments passed the Act of Union in 1800 which formally made Ireland a part of the United Kingdom and removed any last vestige of autonomy from the Irish people by abolishing the Irish Parliament. During the first quarter of the 19th century, there was a great deal of agitation within Ireland for the repeal of the Acts of Parliament which disenfranchised Catholics. These efforts were led by the Catholic Irish lawyer and politician Daniel O'Connell who, in 1823, formed a non-violent organization named the Catholic Association aimed at the abolition of the Act of Union and the restitution of the Irish Parliament and the repeal of the penal laws. O'Connell was unsuccessful in attempting to repeal the Act of Union, but his movement led to the passing of the Roman Catholic Relief Act 1829, which finally allowed Catholics to sit in the British Parliament. Daniel O'Connell was elected and took his seat to become the first Catholic Member of Parliament in Westminster since 1689. However, there were other movements in Ireland which were less peaceful in their approach. Periodic unrest and violence broke out in several areas of Ireland. In Ulster in the north, there were repeated clashes between Catholics and the Protestants of the newly established Orange Order. In rural areas most landowners were either English or Protestant or both, and tenant farmers and farm workers could be evicted at short notice and were very poorly paid. In response, a number of secret societies sprang up which were dedicated to stand up for tenants' rights. The Ribbon Society, for example, was a secret, agrarian society which used the threat of violence and intimidation to prevent landlords from evicting poor tenants. Members of groups such as the Ribbon Society, who became known as Ribbonmen, generally supported O'Connell's Catholic Association as well as Irish independence. This brought them into frequent conflict with the Orange Order, a Protestant, loyalist fraternal order. These confrontations sometimes became violent, as in the attack by Ribbonmen on a tavern in the village of Garvan, County Londonderry in 1813 where members of the Orange Order were holding a meeting. One Ribbonman was killed in the attack, and the northern part of Ireland became the scene of several violent clashes between these two groups. In the 1830s, an episode which became known as the Tithe War suddenly erupted. It began as a series of peaceful protests but soon became interspersed with violent confrontations. The issue was the requirement for people living in Ireland to pay an annual tithe towards the maintenance of the official Church of Ireland. Many Catholics objected because they were in effect being forced to subsidize a Protestant church which they neither used nor wanted. Between 1830 and 1836, there was an organized effort at resisting the payment of tithes. For the most part, this protest was conducted peacefully, but there was organized and continuing violence, especially in rural areas. A British government report on the situation noted 242 murders and over 160 violent assaults in 1831 alone. In December 1834 at Radcormac in County Cork, armed members of the Royal Irish Constabulary supported by units of the British Army opened fire on protesters during an attempt to collect a tithe worth less than 40 shillings, killing 12 people and injuring 42. Finally, the British government changed the rules regarding tithes so that these were included in rents and paid by landlords. However, this simply removed the necessity for collection of the tithes from tenants and made this instead the responsibility of landlords. In rural areas or Ireland, there remained a great deal of animosity between the impoverished tenant farmers and workers who were mainly Catholic and landlords and representatives of the establishment who were generally Protestants. Page 8.